Hey guys, today we're going to talk about wood. So the question was simple. It's 3 questions and we'll address one each at a time. The question is, how important is it that the wood be dried correctly? 1. 2 is, how do they dry the wood? 2. And 3 is, what should I do to make sure my instrument lasts and doesn't have issues after I receive it and it continues to dry? Okay, let's hit them in no particular order. Okay, so the question is, how important is it that a wood be dry? Well, it's actually pretty important, but there's something else in play that you need to be aware of. Let's talk about 2 things in particular when it comes to wood. First, let's talk about a tree, because that's what really wood is, a tree. A tree is basically, no matter what species, is the same. They pull moisture from the ground through their root system up through the tree. Eventually ends on their leaves. Okay. Now, what happens is, because of that system, the moisture, the water, is mostly contained towards the bottom. And then as the tree uses it, it pulls the water up. When we cut a tree down and let it fall over and die, like everything that dies, it starts drying up and shrinking. Well, what happens is, because the top of the tree had less moisture in it, the fibers become closer. They're more dense. In other words, they're closer together. There's less moisture in between them. And as the fibers constrict and moisture leaves the wood, they become closer together than they are at the bottom, right? See how this works? So when we chop the tree up, generally speaking, most woods, the top of the tree will have heavier blocks than the bottom tree because of that density. Now, that has nothing to do with moisture. That is just the density of the wood fibers. So it's important that you understand that it is very easy to get a guitar that weighs 9 pounds and then see an identical guitar that weighs 7 pounds, and that is the difference, where the block was cut from. Now, let's talk about moisture. Obviously, there was moisture in the tree, and like I said, that's what's causing the density, is as the moisture leaves, the fibers constrict. So, how important is it that the water be removed? Well, it's important because the water in a block of ash like this, right, can be half the weight. In other words, they could take a block of ash this big to make this body, and it'd be about 8 pounds. After they dry it, they can get it down to almost 4 pounds. So you can see how important it is to get the moisture out, because if you don't, not only does it add weight, but that's a lot of shrinkage that the guitar can do after the point of the tree being cut down. So, what's next? Okay, so what's next? The manufacturer now has the wood, and they got the blocks. And the blocks essentially have been kind of drying out since the tree died, because regardless of the environment, if something's dying, it's losing moisture. Now, so what does the manufacturer do to kind of help this along? Well, some manufacturers like Fender put blocks on spacers on pallets and run fans across them and essentially air dry them out through natural over time. That's a great idea. Some manufacturers like Music Man and Paul Reed Smith go to more extremes, and what they do is they kiln the wood, is what we call it. That's where they put it in a room, and Paul Reed Smith does it 103 degrees at about 7% humidity, and they dry the wood out. They basically have a system that they've designed to extract as much moisture from the wood as possible. Now, why is that important? Well, 2 reasons. 1, obviously, when you adhere the paint or finish to them, you don't want the body to continue to shrink because it can pull the finish away, and you get these like little haze bubbles where the paint is kind of popped off the finish, kind of like glue, not sticking, right? And you have a space in them. That's not good. Next is important because when you fret the neck, in other words, put the frets in, what's going to happen is if the neck continues to shrink, the fret metal won't, and we get what's called fret sprout. Feels like little saw blades sticking out. Real common with inexpensive guitars because the wood was not properly dried, but also because wood on inexpensive guitars usually doesn't have a finish on it, and they ship it from overseas, and as it sits in the boat ride, that wood kind of absorbs some moisture, and then when it gets to its final destination, it dries out. When it comes to drying, I'm an authority. I live in Arizona, one of the driest places on earth, and we deal with this issue every day. Drying is a problem. Think about this. June, July, and August here, I am so inundated with repairs because of dryness. Now, why do you say? Well, it's because what people don't understand is this last little important thing that happens, that the factories can only do so much to dry the wood out, and then the last piece kind of relies on you. So what do you have to do? Well, here's the first thing you do. A lot of us are buying guitars on the internet. Now, if you're not buying a guitar on the internet and you're using a local store, you have to understand that some local stores buy their guitars from the manufacturers. Either way, the instruments get shipped to us. So here's the problem, first with shipping. Sorry. in Arizona, we have an issue where in June, July, and August, the drivers don't have air-conditioned trucks. So the trucks get about 120, 130 degrees inside them. The boxes get really hot. The guitars get cooked. Then they bring them into the stores or your home. You open the box immediately and pull it out. First mistake. You should always wait until the guitar box is the temperature of the room. We keep it safe. We just do 24 hours. When boxes come in, we wait 24 hours before we open them, unless the weather is conducive to the weather inside the shop. If you live somewhere else in the country or other places on the planet where maybe you have the exact opposite, maybe it's cold outside, the same thing applies. You wait until the acclimation of the box to the room you're in. This is also a good practice when in its case or gig bag, that wood does not like extreme changes. In other words, wet to dry, dry to wet, cold to hot, hot to cold. It doesn't like these variables. It likes to be slowly moved along. It's the extremes that's caused the problems, like the neck to kind of twist or move. So you should do what you can to stop that from happening. Now, do I think you should keep your guitars in cases, and do I think you should use humidifiers on electric guitars? Not really. Humidifiers are really important for acoustic guitars, and here's why. If I took a sponge this thick, this big, and I took an eyedropper and I dropped some water in it, it wouldn't really make a difference, like this piece of ash or mahogany or alder, thick piece of wood. However, if the piece was thin, let's say an 1/8 inch piece of foam, or like a sponge, like a acoustic guitar, and I dropped an eyedropper, obviously you would see the sponge move because the water is per capita more than the sponge. So acoustics are really more temperamental when it comes to moisture. So sometimes in cases an acclimate, right, and keeping them humidified is important. Electric guitars shouldn't have the issue as much. I don't tell people, let me start, I actually do a disclaimer too. My information is really focused to my environment. I have to help people every day in my environment, and I really would trust what I'm saying in this environment. If you live in Florida, or if you live in somewhere that's not like my environment, also trust those local people, professionals and friends, because again, you have to, people know their environment. So keep that with a grain of salt too. But the other thing I wanted to say was, when it comes to treating your guitar, I tell people, don't worry about being so extreme. Just take the negatives away. Here are the negatives. Be aware that if a guitar is by a window, that windows get hot during the day and cold at night, regardless of the time of year, which means they radiate that on the guitar. That's not good. Keep in mind that the vents coming out of in your house, if they're pointed towards the guitar, if that's hitting the guitar, it's essentially no different than a hairdryer being either on hot mode if it's heating, or in no mode, cold, like in the summertime. And the reason is because most systems now use an evaporative system. In other words, like central air takes the moisture out of the air, so it's dry air hitting your guitar. Not good. Should you put oils or fret conditioners on your fretboard? I absolutely think it doesn't hurt at all. I don't know if there's a plus to it, but there's definitely no negative to it, that's for sure. Obviously, in a short video like this, you're not going to be an expert on wood by any means, but I wanted to give you some insight on some things that the questions were, which is basically how does the wood work, how do the manufacturers treat the wood, and what can you do to kind of help the wood along and make your guitar play its best for the longest. So I hope that was helpful, and again, as always, thank you for your time, know your gear.